Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump discussion. This week, we've got a special guest in, and we're going to be talking about building a true retained offering. Again, I've done a little bit of research on what's happening in the retained market, and there's not a lot of data out there that we can really use. However, the REC and ABSCO have sort of been reviewing the agency sort of directories, and it's evident that over 90% of all professional recruitment agencies operate a permanent or contingent permanent model, but less than 10% of recruitment agencies actually offer some element of retained search, and in reality only a fraction are actually dedicated to retained work. So it says there's an opportunity there as a permanent business to build there. Typical retained fees, according to the REC, go from between 22 and 30% payable in 3 tranches with non-transferable retainers, where the typical recruitment fee is ranging from 15 to 25%. I think 25% is a stretch for most, based on first year's salary, and obviously that is on paid on start date, which gives a really good argument for adopting our retained services. Today, as I said, I'm joined by, and I'd like to welcome and introduce Jump's latest associate, Kate Parker. Kate's got over 30 years experience in the industry, started life as a researcher in the life science search marketplace. In 2010, she moved to a senior leadership role at Harvey Nash and then Berwick Talent Solutions, which is part of Odgers Berndtson Company, which to me is always when there's a search sort of royalty company. Her experience included strategy, account management, continuous service employment, and portfolio sales and new position development. She spent sort of most of her career client-facing, and her role at Corn Ferry, another search royalty agency, marked a pivotal shift as she became VP and EMEA, from rightly, regional director and lead for their search and innovation and delivery teams. She accepted that challenge of driving operational excellence and productivity, again for a 160-strong search associate company. Kate led the initiatives across people, process, and technology, and successful driving progressive transformation processes into that marketplace. So, Kate, well done. She opened a new business this year.
Well done, Howard.
Well done, mate.
That was
you
a
did very
mouthful.
well. Yes.
Well, I don't know who
for you
wrote
to say that.
I don't know who wrote
Kate, I
that,
think,
but they haven't sort of. But there you
you're
go.
You're the first member of royalty, Kate. Clearly, we
First member
I
of
don't know
royalty.
about
Yeah,
that.
God, yeah.
Correct.
I've even got my rough colour on to sort of,
There you go.
very royal.
There you go.
Very royal.
But she opened a business this year, didn't you, Kate?
I did, yes.
Came to work with Jump as well. She's also a fellow of the Recruitment Employment Confederation and serves on their advisory council. So, busy lady indeed.
Yes.
We've also got Dave and Paul. Clowns.
Not royalty.
Not royalty indeed.
in any way.
Debatable.
Court jesters, I've classed them as there, who no doubt will be adding to the topic from there. But let's kick off and help the audience demystify the difference between contingent recruitment and retained. So, Kate,
yes.
First question, obvious question.
Mhm.
What are the true differences then between retained and contingent recruitment models?
Okay, so I think there's a few here. First and foremost, one of the key differences is around the commitment and the payment structure. So retained search involves an upfront fee, commonly known as a retainer, that will ensure that clients will get a dedicated and focused search process. And then the fee structure will often include additional payments at milestones, but different firms apply different fee structures. So some will use a 0, 30, 60. Odgers do that, so they'll have the retainer right up front, they'll have another payment on 30 days, another payment on 60 days. Some other firms adopt a sort of a 2-stage, so they have a retainer up front and then a success fee on completion, and then others will apply a milestone, so looking at upfront retainer, a payment on shortlist, and then a payment on successful acceptance of offer. So there's various things that you can sort of negotiate when you're structuring a retained search deal around more than just the structure itself. But it really depends on, you as a supplier, where your key strengths are, who your target market are, what your client's appetite is as to how you structure. But the really key thing is that upfront, whereas contingent obviously is 100% success based. You only get the payment on successfully placing a candidate, and that obviously leads to a more competitive, perhaps less personalized approach, although I'd better be careful what I say. The second key difference, really, in my opinion, is around adopting a really high quality and strategic partnership approach. So you do have a higher touch relationship in a retained search relationship, which would really include a thorough analysis of the client's business, their culture, their long-term goals. And that information that you take during a client briefing stage would be translated into collateral like the candidate brief document, for example. So, you know, we would always produce a really professional looking candidate brief document that we would use for engaging, attracting candidates, which would give a really clear story of the employee, the firm, sorry, the employer, the firm, the value proposition. So that, you know, in order to get that information, you need to have a really sort of strategic partnership with your client. Whereas contingent recruitment typically focuses on filling positions more quickly, sometimes, but not always, at the expense of thoroughness. Again, I'll be careful what I say. And then obviously, because of the commercial structure of a retained search, it should be based on exclusivity of relationship, which means that search firms can allocate dedicated resource to each mandate, providing a more thorough approach, whereas in contingent, you're going to be competing against other agencies, and it will be a different sort of environment that you're working in. And candidate quality and reach. Retained search will typically involve a more thorough and in-depth vetting process. You're going to hopefully ensure a better fit by targeting passive candidates. It would involve the definition of a comprehensive search strategy before you actually start the search work, a thorough market mapping exercise prior to outreach and engagement. So in summary, I'd say for both clients and for candidates, retained search, it offers higher commitment, higher service levels, ultimately leading to better quality hires. And a proper search process will also ensure confidentiality and a more strategic approach to talent acquisition from a candidate perspective. And we'll talk about candidate experience, I think, later on, Howard. It should provide candidates with a more personalised experience, candidates that you'll build relationships with over a period of time so that you can then align roles to them that fit their long-term goals and career aspirations.
So I'm going to throw a little bit of a challenge into the next questions that you're going to answer. Okay.
Already?
You said a couple of things there that I'm sure a lot of recruiters will turn their nose up at. Better relationship, better candidate search and things like that. Where I generally think that when you start to look at that true retain model, and I built a retain model for the agency that I ran, you do get a far deeper relationship with your clients. It's not a transactional relationship, and you do have to be a lot better at searching for candidates over a longer period of time. So I want to really sort of challenge you to sort of highlight some of those differences, because I'm sure that some people are on the webinar today, and those people who watch it afterwards will sort of question that. And I want to really sort of highlight that there is a huge difference in the way that you operate compared to the contingency sort of model, which is very transactional. So let's move on then, because I think there are sort of common misconceptions about retained search services. So what are those misconceptions, and how do we change those?
So I think one really common misconception is around retained search is only for executive level positions. And obviously, whilst it's often used for C-suite positions, retained search can also be really valuable for any critical, specialized or hard to fill skill set, where, you know, finding the right fit is absolutely essential, it's business critical. Another misconception is that it's more expensive. Obviously, you have got that upfront element, it's more costly upfront, but the longer term benefits of a more comprehensive search and the quality of hire, the onboarding, the follow-up, that can reduce turnover by ensuring a better fit of candidates, and it should therefore save money in the long run, justifying the upfront investment. And, you know, I think people, this is probably not a misconception, this is probably quite true. It is a more lengthy process. But for those, you know, C-suite positions, those critical hires, the thorough approach, yes, it might take longer, but it does ensure a higher quality match, ultimately saving time and resources. So when you're thinking about taking a search proposition to market, it's about client education and educating the clients as to the benefit of a retained search model. And your client will have these misconceptions as you might have as potential providers of these solutions. So, looking at what the benefits are, and being able to, provide sort of counter statements, if you like, to those doubts is really important as you go to market.
Kate, can I just pick up on something here? I worked alongside a search and selection business for quite a while, and the level of, or the depth of the search was significantly deeper and broader than is typically the case in contingent. And you've kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
You talk about the speed when you're in a contingent situation. You have to race very quickly, get CVs over, make sure you get them there before somebody else sends them across, and so forth. Whereas my experience when I was working in a retained environment, because the money, as you say, was up front and the relationship was somewhat deeper, the level of investigation, as it were, into finding the correct candidates was really quite was fascinating, actually. And indeed, the people doing those searches were very high level, highly paid graduates. I mean, I won't say the salaries they were on, but they were considerably more than the typical resource that is used within a contingent placement environment. So maybe perhaps you could just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I alluded earlier to sort of defining a comprehensive search strategy and then sort of the market mapping piece. And you wouldn't necessarily have those stages, or you wouldn't have those stages in a contingent search, because it's sort of fastest finger first and looking at the job boards and the usual suspects like LinkedIn, for example. What I mean by a search strategy is when you're developing both the candidate brief and the position brief, or the position specification with the client, it's gaining that really deep understanding of the critical fit of the candidates from both a skills perspective and a culture perspective, and then thinking about the universe or the world that those candidates might exist within. So not just the industry sector that the clients are in, but perhaps adjacent industry sectors. It's understanding whether they would take people who could work remotely from overseas, so looking at the geographical as well as the skills sort of backdrop to sort of really form this audience where your candidates might be found, and then thinking about how you will approach the market to penetrate the market, to find those candidates and to approach and engage those candidates. And that will often be, and I'll talk a bit later about some of the sort of technology and tools you can use, but going past, yes, you can advertise, search firms will often advertise roles, but it's really about identifying passive talent, because often they're going to be the right people. The best people will be those who are in role. And as you go up, the seniority level, there are far few people at the top, and that's executive, C-suite executive talent is hard to engage. So using tools like BoardX, like CapIQ, like PitchBook to do sort of really deep research on the movers and shakers in that particular marketplace. It really is, it's research. It's not sort of just scouring a job board, and I don't mean that to sound derogatory, but it really is deep research, and also looking at sourcing, so speaking to people for recommendations and referrals. So it's deep work, and providing that market map then to the client to say, these are the people that we've identified, this is our long list. There could be, I'm working with a client at the moment, they know that to get down to the right candidate, they need to have a long list of 120. That's what works in their marketplace. They're very specialized executive search into PE-backed SaaS, and they have to have a long list that is 120 viable candidates in order to be able to get to the answer. So that is going to create a level of depth. And I think it was Pauline's questions around length of time to actually execute that properly and do that research properly before you start the engagement piece.
I think that's a question, and I think what we've got to understand is that there is a place for both contingent and a place for both retained.
Of course.
And neither should we apologise for each side of the business. So I think, that's a bit that I would say that, you're a very different, and these things that we're talking about are, if I looked at my recruitment businesses that I'm working with, most of the things that you've talked about there are very alien to them with regards to the search and how they go into that search. You're right, they search on a job board, they search on LinkedIn. There is no in-depth penetration into the market or subsequent markets where candidates may be talking to. And so that's the bit that these people we've got to understand, is that if we're going to adapt a retained service, we can't just polish our contingent service and hope we can sell it for 25-30%. We've got to be doing the things that you're talking about here to make it a true retained search, and therefore can happily charge 30% plus for that.
Howard, just a quick point, sorry to interrupt you, but a quick point, and I think it's a really critical point. The reason that you then get the time to do this depth of search is you've been paid upfront.
Exactly. So you dedicate the resource.
Yes, exactly. So you've got the gift of time, the upfront payment,
and the lack of competition.
Exactly. Yeah.
So looking at that, then, what steps can a recruitment firm take to make a successful transition from contingent to a retained search model?
So I think it requires, first and foremost, a massive transition in mindset. So it's a shift from transactional to consultative. There's different lenses that we can look at this through, really. But, from a client side, it involves building strong relationships with clients and being able to demonstrate the value of the approach. That comes with understanding the client's business and providing, being able to provide strategic advice. From an internal perspective, you can't simply sort of one day have a recruiter sitting on a contingent desk and the next day sort of like you go off and sell and deliver retained search. There needs to be training and development for recruiters to enhance their consultative selling skills, gain knowledge of their clients' industries. And I would suggest that you can't be all things to all people in search. You have to define quite a tight market sector that you're going to work within, or a function. If you're thinking about doing, for example, CFO search, you've got a network of candidates who will have been CFOs within a type of industry, whether that's industrial manufacturing, whether that's life sciences, whether that's something else. So you need to be able to build a network of candidates within a specific area, rather than just saying we do retained search, we do it for all positions, and we do it for all clients. So I think that sort of focus and being specific. Being specific, yes, is key. I think, educating your clients, clearly communicating the benefits of retained search, highlighting, the benefits that we talked about, like the dedicated resource, higher quality candidates that are going to be found by engaging the passive marketplace. And you need a really robust end-to-end search methodology and timeline. You need to make sure that all of the key elements of a comprehensive search process are included in that, long lists, short lists, client presentation, due diligence, offer negotiation, follow-up. So it is, it can be a sort of 2 to 3 month timeline, 8 to 10 weeks to deliver a search. And you need to be able to have, search is a process, and it needs to be delivered as a process. You need to make sure that you've got the systems and platforms in place, that the systems that you have are fit for purpose. There is a lot more detail involved in the updates and the outputs that you provide to clients. So you'll need to increase your tools beyond, the job boards and the LinkedIn to gain, deeper market insight and candidate reach. The things I've already mentioned, PitchBook, BoardX, CapIQ, there are many others. You need to develop strong relationships with clients to gain their confidence in your ability to deliver results. So if you've got case studies and testimonials, or any data on success rates of retained versus contingent, that can also, help to communicate the value. And you should think about maybe doing a pilot program. So start with a few retained searches for key existing clients to demonstrate success and start building a track record. And as I said before, don't try and be all things to all clients. It's about how you position yourself externally, and how you educate your clients, and it's about how you prepare internally and have the systems, processes, methodology and skills to be able to deliver a search effectively. So it will take time. It's not a sort of, an overnight, right, we're going to move to this and it's going to be successful. It needs to be structured and thorough. And also, that really important in any sort of recruitment delivery is continuously seeking feedback, being willing to adapt and improve your approach as well.
Kate, would it be, is it the case, sorry, I'll just be very quick. Is it the case that you should have a dedicated search and selection consultant rather than try to blend
I believe
contingent
so.
and exec search? Okay.
I believe so. Yeah.
Hey, I was going to ask you just for your opinion on this. Is retained search and selection, is that something that an existing recruitment company can do, or are they better having a different business that does search?
So yeah, I mean, I think having a different brand, certainly. I think you might be, as a provider or a supplier, viewed with cynicism around capability and expertise. If you bolt on an offering under your sort of, your current structure, I think having a specialist search brand with, to Paul's point, dedicated people, it's a different value proposition. It should therefore be very distinct in how it's marketed and how it's delivered. So I think separating the two out, and you see many organizations, Harvey Nash, I mean, they've actually spun off Alumni, which was their executive search business, but it was very, very separate. You had Harvey Nash Perm, which was contingent perm, you had contract, and then you had, executive search sat on a different floor actually, and completely, there was no crossover other than a little bit of sort of cross-selling. It was very, very separate, and it was a different brand.
But to admit, Robert Half did exactly the same. And when I was pushing my own business down a more retained model, I've got to get the first comment that you said there. Getting your staff on board is really important. And it was obvious, to back up Paul's comment there, that some people were far more adept at selling search, and therefore we moved them into that, and the rest made or carried on doing contingent recruitment.
It's not for everybody, but some people don't like the slow pace, and it's quite cerebral in comparison to, a kind of a typical contingent recruitment sales floor. It's a different vibe, and I think it's not for everybody.
So I'm going to come back to Amy's question towards the end, because I've got the same question to ask Amy. So thank you for reminding me. When we look at that, then, how do you ensure client satisfaction and retention in the retained search model? Because that's the big fear, to get clients to move from the contingent to retained. How do you ensure client satisfaction?
Okay, so I mean, you need to be really clear with expectations from the outset. I think, from both a client and a candidate perspective, but I think communication is absolutely key. You are going to get searches which end up on the operating table and really need to sort of, be put in a hospital bed and revived. You need to calibrate and course correct as you go along. So that sort of weekly update, that cadence of weekly updates with your client, reporting on progress, making sure they understand the process, the timelines, what they can expect at each stage. That helps to manage expectations. It helps to avoid misunderstandings. So it's that, transparency and consistency of updating and communication, and just being, honest about if it's proving more challenging. And often with searches, you'll get the added dynamic of, we want a diverse shortlist, or we want, people who've got diversity of thought. So you have to start your search focusing on that particular audience, so that you can provide a bit of an early warning to your client if you're not going to be able to meet that expectation. you should do everything you can to deliver on promises. We all do that all of the time when we're working with clients, but really strive to meet or exceed the deliverables. Really, go the extra mile to delight your clients. They are going to expect it because they are paying a premium fee for your service. Provide detail in your progress reporting. It's you can't pitch up to a progress meeting and say, yeah, we've spoken to a few candidates, we've got some in process. It needs to be a detailed progress update report. These are the candidates we've spoken to, these are the ones that we're qualifying out, these are the ones that we're moving to the next stage. And all of that can actually be sort of assisted by technology and the types of systems you use to pull the data from your CRM. But the level of detail that you need to provide is so much more onerous than it is in a contingent process, and that will be the expectation of the client. You need to make sure that you're providing a tailored approach. Customize your search strategy and your process with the client's specific needs and with their company culture. You're not just looking for candidates who are a good fit skills wise, but who are a good fit culturally for the organization as a whole. And I think a really important element in the search process and sort of, thinking about client satisfaction and retention is the onboarding and post-placement support. Some of the fees that search firms charge are eye-watering, and you really want to make sure that those candidates stay in post and are productive and integrate well. So offering onboarding and follow-up services to ensure that they are successfully integrated, addressing any issues that arise after the placement, to ensure that long-term satisfaction that you can then build on. And thinking about, repeat business, these senior roles, they don't come around as often as the next level down and the levels below that and the individual contributor roles. So doing a great job on a really senior piece of work, another really senior piece of work may not come along from that company for 6 months, 2 years. So, you need to keep close to that client and make sure that that integration has gone well.
I think that clear expectation is really important, because we tend not to set a clear expectation. Yeah, we'll fill it is our expectation of what we give to our clients. We're setting 2 expectations of the timeline, what the market's like, the knowledge, and using all that data is really important. And what you're talking there about, I work with a headhunter down in London, and about 6-8 weeks ago I was there. They dropped a 300k deal with add-ons, which will take it over 7 figures. And so they've spent about a year finding that person. It's taken them a year to get to that point. And therefore, sometimes it's a long-term pitch, but it's not just about the fee. They've got add-ons to that fee based on performance, etc., bringing the right person in. So there's lots of different things in there, but it's the expectation piece. And I think that's the bit where contingent recruitment suffers, because we don't set true expectations for our clients. It's the expectation is, yeah, of course, we'll try and fill it, rather than, right, this is what's happening in the marketplace, this is the data in the marketplace, this is what that looks like, this is our knowledge, and this is how we're going to use that knowledge to then create a better search opportunity, etc. And I think that's one of the big differences.
And I think, getting feedback from clients. So in my role at FMP, one of my clients is a small search practitioner. It was a small search firm, one practitioner, and she asks, I do her client satisfaction interviews for her. So whenever she closes a search, I do an interview with the client to understand how well it went, what could have been done better, and feed that back to her so that she can constantly improve and evolve her service. So I think that sort of in-person client feedback is really, really important, but there's nothing worse than feedback that's taken and not acted on. So, make sure, for goodness sake, that if you are going to get feedback from a client, you do actually act on that feedback and make those changes. One other technique I've seen used, and not all search firms do it, but Berwick certainly did, is an end of search report. So regardless, sometimes you might have searches that get filled by an internal candidate, or you might have a search that just doesn't result in what you want it to result in. But as a search firm, you've done all of that work. You've got the shortlist, the long list of the shortlist. You've done the presentation. For whatever reason, it's not concluded in a hire. to support, a cancellation fee situation, it's useful to be able to present an end of search report to say, this is what we have done. This is how we've mapped the market. This is how many people we've spoken to. This was the diversity ratios. This is how many people you had for interview. So, providing that sort of wrap up document is, I think, quite a useful tool in sort of finishing up a search.
So one of the things go on, Dave. Sorry.
I was going to ask Kate, do you think that search firms or organisations that are thinking of using this or adding this to their service should be investing in things like psychometric tests? So,
yes.
For example, I'm the chair of a search firm that's in the digital infrastructure space, and they use a specific psychometric test for every single candidate.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Do you think
absolutely.
that's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big search firms, they have sort of created their own assessment frameworks. Others will draft in, business psychologists to do the assessments, or they will use an online tool like Myers-Briggs, or there's a million out there around sort of leadership capability and that sort of thing. So I think, yes, that assessment piece is really important. Some firms will bolt that on. Some firms will have a separate assessment and development practice, but incorporating that assessment within the process, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So one thing you've alluded to all the way through this is that retained model is very different and our candidate search is very different. So how does the retained search model impact the candidate experience compared to the contingent experience?
Yeah, I mean, typically it will be more personalized. Typically it will be a longer process. And I think it's really important, as you would manage your client expectations, to manage candidate expectations. And that's what I talked about, the candidate brief document right at the beginning at Hodges and at Corn Ferry. We would produce a candidate brief which would talk about the role, the client's EVP, etc. And at the end, it would talk about what the stages of the process are and what the timelines are, so that the candidates have got a really clear idea as to when interviews are likely to be happening. I also think that there's a much more thorough vetting process. So, candidates can sometimes be taken aback by that. And this, the assessment question, they might not always be expecting to have to do an assessment. There's a lot of rigor around due diligence and referencing. That can take some time. There's, vetting of qualifications and qualifications validation. So there's all those steps in the process that you may not experience as a candidate in a contingent process, which will mean that it's more thorough, more in depth and longer. So I think, managing the candidate's expectations up front and letting them know that all of that is going to happen is really important. What else on that?
I mean, I can speak as somebody that's had those experiences on the occasions I was headhunted. Even the first filter conversation from the resourcer was very, the questions were very direct, but quite probing. And I found myself sitting on a call for over an hour before there was even a decision to meet me. And then when I was called to a meeting, hour and a half, sitting in front of the search and selection consultant. And this is all before getting close to the client.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's it. You will have those sort of multiple touch points and interaction and interviews with the search firm. It's the search firms. That's why they're able to charge the fee, because they're doing all of that vetting and due diligence and interviewing and screening and qualifying, in a very, very in-depth way before you even get onto the shortlist. They want to be confident that the 3 or 4 people that they're presenting at shortlist have got, there's going to be sort of 2 or 3 within that are going to be appointable candidates. So yes, it will be more in depth and longer.
So I've got a question, but I don't know how many more questions you've got.
I've got 2, Dave. Fire away.
Can I ask you a quick question, Kate? When you're presenting a candidate at a search, are you typically presenting the candidate for the job, or are you giving the client a choice of, say, 1 or 2?
I think when you get to shortlist, you should be, I mean, you would agree this with the client up front, you know, how many candidates do you want on the shortlist? Some will say, oh, we just want 3, some will want more like 6. So I think, you know, you need to understand what the client want and need to start with, but there would be more than one, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it's, you know, that also sort of links back to the sort of strategic partnership that you'll have with the client. A really good executive search consultant who knows their market, who knows their candidates, should be have the EI, emotional intelligence, and the skills to be able to challenge their client's thinking, and sometimes present, you know, what could be considered a bit of a left field candidate, and sometimes they're the best candidates. You know, a really good search consultant who over a period of time has built up their network and really knows their clients and their market will know these people that are rough diamonds or whatever, and will be able to sort of push back on the client and say, actually, no, you really need to see this person, they're amazing. So I think definitely not just one. No, I think it's kind of 3, 4 minimum for a shortlist.
Okay.
So I'm going to sew Amy's question into this question, Kate, as well.
I didn't see it, so let me see
Amy,
if I can see the chat.
Amy's question is: you've mentioned tools that would have to be increased. You mentioned PitchBook. What other tools are available, etc. So my question is: what role does technology play in enhancing retained and search recruitment processes?
Yeah, so I mean, it's crucial, but it's crucial with everything these days, isn't it? You know, whether it's contingent or search, but it, you know, it does play a very important role in streamlining the search process, improving candidate sourcing through data and data analytics and AI, and enhancing communication. So there's all sorts of ways you can use technology and AI in this this type of service. The tools I mentioned, BoardX, PitchBook, CapIQ, they all offer slightly different things. They're easy to get, but you have to pay for them. You know, so PitchBook is pretty expensive, but if you're working in the PE or the VC marketplace, it can give you absolutely brilliant market insight on when the funding rounds are happening, and therefore you will then know when to approach those candidates or those clients, because if it's very hard to pull a candidate out of a PE scenario until they have their champagne moment and there's a kind of, you know, the deal is done and finalized. It's kind of frowned upon if people who are embedded by a PE firm into a portfolio company sort of leave until that champagne moment. So having that intelligence around where those funding rounds are and when those sales are happening will give you the intelligence to know when to approach those candidates. So that's really PitchBook for PE and VC based work is important. CapIQ is great if you want to get a sort of a target list of companies for BD, but also will help you to identify the key players, the board, the C-suites within those. BoardX similar. And you know, LinkedIn is still really good. Let's face it, LinkedIn Recruiter is always used by search consultants, but it is complemented by those other tools. The other thing to, sorry, go on.
No, go on.
The other thing to think about is the reporting obligations. I've touched on it, the detail of the output that you need to produce, way more onerous and in depth than a contingent service. So it's really important you've got the right technology to support the easy creation of progress reporting, for example, which if you're doing that manually, it will be ridiculously time consuming. So you know, a basic CRM or ATS might not have all the functionality you need for that. Invenias, which is now, I think, has been bought by Bullhorn, Ezekia, File Finder, they're some of the most common executive search software applications on the market. Then you've got applications like Templify, which you can integrate with most CRMs, and they'll help you to produce really professional, consistent, high quality progress reports, candidate reports, end of search reports. And then thinking about AI and sort of note taking, MetaView, which is specifically designed for recruiting, is being sort of adopted by quite a few search firms. MetaView can join interviews, briefing calls and debriefs. It can provide high quality interview transcripts and summaries, so that, you know, the candidates, that the recruiters can fully focus on the conversations they're having with clients and candidates, and not on taking notes. And then it will provide the transcripts and the summaries Oh, sorry, someone's trying to call me. It's Pitchbook, actually.
There you go.
Yeah.
They're always listening.
Oh God, I know. They're trying me on my mobile now. Dearie me. Where was I?
You were talking about MetaView and just saying
MetaView, yes.
how you can use that for summaries.
Absolutely, thank you. So MetaView also provides interview feedback on interviewer performance. So it will sort of look at the conversation you've had, and it will give you some coaching. You know, how much did you talk? How much did the candidate talk? What was the question of the quality of your questions? You know, so it's really, really intelligent. There's a client I'm working with at the moment who are thinking of adopting that, but it's always that one of, you know, people being nervous about that level of technology integration. And you don't have to be old school and traditional when you're thinking about doing, you know, presenting candidate reports. I used a product called Interview, which is interview with an H on the front. That was for a retained project for the Department of Health, and obviously being public sector, they were hugely sort of bureaucratic in their process, but we captured kind of the killer question element in a video interview between me and the candidates, and then presented that on the interview portal alongside a candidate report. And you know, they actually loved that, because you know, they're so used to reams and reams of paperwork in a public sector search process. It was a nice piece of innovation.
Yeah,
Loads of different ways.
One of my clients uses, several of my clients use Interview. And fun enough, we had a board meeting yesterday talking about how we get better bang for our bucks from Interview. And what you've just said was very similar to our discussion yesterday. It's a great tool. So yeah, absolutely. What you've said, I think, very clearly is that to do this, you really need to invest in technology. You can't. It's not a question of resisting it or doing it on a manual basis. It's really important that if you get yourself into
proposition, so you need to think about technology, training, resources. It's people, processes, and technology. You need to sort of elevate all of those things to be able to take a you know, robust offering to market.
Well, let's slide that into the last question then, because I like that, you know, how we take that to market. So what are the common challenges then faced in retained search, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, it's competitive, you know, it is highly competitive. And I know that you sort of gave us some stats earlier from Rec, but, you know, it is becoming a saturated market. So it is difficult to stand out and attract clients. So you really need to build a distinct brand identity. And that goes back to what Dave and Paul were saying about, you know, do you have it as something that's included within your proposition or as an added one? You need to make sure that whichever market or function you're going to be operating in, you are continuously updating your knowledge on market trends and industry trends, and you adjust your strategies accordingly. Retained search is time consuming, you know, so you should implement technology and automation to streamline where possible. And I think the number one challenge is finding top talent. You know, the competition for top tier executive talent, or these hard to find critical skills, it's intense. The best candidates will be already employed, and they won't be actively seeking new opportunities. So you need to start building your networks, focusing on that specific sector or function, as we've talked about. Be active in the market, LinkedIn groups, in-person networking groups, relevant associations. Don't just rely on the tools I've talked about. You know, get on the phone, speak to people, get referrals, get recommendations. And develop targeted outreach strategies to reach those hard to engage passive candidates. But it's building relationships over time. As I've said before, this is not an overnight win. This is something that any firm who's considering doing it needs to consider, you know, all of these aspects before embarking on this, cognizant of the fact that it will take time and require investment, but the payoff will be, if done right, significant.
So I'm going to slide a little question in. Do you think then there is a halfway house between contingent and fully bowed retained search that companies could offer that would help increase rates,
I mean,
etc.?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of, you know, there's a hybrid model, if you like, but I think that it doesn't sit in the same territory as what I would consider genuine retained search. So I think you have to be careful about that. I think people do that. I think firms do that, but then is that just, to your original question, polishing the contingent model, charging a bit extra? So yes, it can be done, but how effective it will be in the long term, that's questionable, I think.
Okay, so I've got to admit, a really fascinating conversation, because it's really opening up the differences between the standard recruitment model and what was actually retained and what should be retained. And the bit that in the middle is what most people are doing is polishing their contingent and delivering that as a retained service, which is more probably of an exclusive service with a bit of retained on, etc., from a payment term. So I think it's a really insight. If anybody on the call wants to contact Kate, then please come through the Jump website. If you want to look at how Kate can help you build your services, then again, contact us, and I'm sure Kate will be more than happy to have a conversation with you and work from there. And from there. Kate, anything else you want to say before we disappear for this session?
No, I don't think so. I think that's kind of covered most of it. I don't know if there's any other questions that we didn't manage to get to on the chat.
We covered everything on the chat.
Good. Excellent. Lovely. But yeah, as it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and please do get in contact if you need any further info.
Brilliant. Very informative, Kate. Thank you much for your time. Dave, Paul, thanks for your, as always, your gesturing.
What's you going to say?
No, it's worrying, isn't it?
It is worrying. After the stick you gave me this front, I'm thinking of something to say, but I shall leave it there. And we'll see you all next week. And
Thank you, Kate.
We've got a really good one next week, because next week is all about breaking into America and how easy it is to break into America. And if you think about this in the way, there's 35 million people in the UK and 35,000 recruitment agencies. There are 350 million employable people in the States and less than 25,000 recruitment agencies. So there's a massive market there to be hit if you know how to get it. So next week, we're going to talk, we've got some people on talking about how to get into the American market and how to work the American market. Kate, thanks very much. Ladies and gents, thanks very much. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.